A devastating blow to one of Prince Edward Island's most valuable industries. A parasite is killing off oysters at high rates, and farmers are sounding the alarm.
It's putting an awful lot of pressure on other little rivers. Come June, I'm fearful for what they're going to be fishing.
You know, we're just a week away from June. The parasite known as MSX is harmless to humans, but deadly to oysters. And some farmers are losing up to 95% of their stock. 95%. First detected in Bedeque Bay last summer, MSX has now spread to most of the province's marine waterways and really putting this industry and hundreds of livelihoods at risk. So joining us now is General Manager at Burley Brothers Seafood is Thomas Burley. He's here to talk about the impact that the outbreak is having on his farm. Good morning and welcome to your morning.
Good morning. Great to be here.
First of all, I'm interested in your personal experience. Describe for us what it's been like on your farm since MSX was first detected.
It's been, there's been a lot of uncertainty. You know, it's one of those things that we've never experienced before. So, you know, we're trying to learn very quickly and adapt very quickly. It's kind of taken the industry by storm in a really big way. You know, it's something that we're not very happy here, but you know, we're trying to make the best of it, given the situation. So.
Thomas, how do you just detect it? You know, for most of us aren't oyster farmers, so we don't know the process. Tell us, like, what does it look like, and then what do you have to do?
Well, that's the thing about it, is that there's a lot we don't know currently about the parasite, but you know, in order to find it, you'd have to do microbiology tests on it. They call it PCR tests. Mm-hmm. So really, you can only see it kind of in a laboratory setting, but it's one of those things that can affect huge amounts of oysters on a bed. I've seen out in our beds, we've lost 60–70% of in some areas, some lots. So it's one of those things. It's kind of like a silent killer of oysters, especially when temperature gets high, between 5 to 20 degrees. You start seeing high salinities. You know, it kind of creates the perfect environment for MSX to thrive. But there's so much we don't know about it, and that's one of the biggest issues that we're facing. Is we're battling an unknown foe. You know, it's a real challenge.
So what are you doing right now with the knowledge that you have been able to gain about MSX?
Well, one of the things is we're kind of looking at our inventory very closely, you know, and kind of making sure that we're rotating things properly. We're experimenting with putting oysters more in shallower water. You know, there's concerns that maybe deeper water might have a different impact. You know, it's kind of like an experimental phase, right? But we're just keeping an eye on our inventory. There's certain areas we deal in the wild fishery where we're not buying from. Bedeque Bay is one of those areas. You know, Enmore, Percival. There's different bays across PEI where you know, we're having to put quality control measures in place just to say, okay, we don't want to introduce this parasite to different rivers. So there's certain areas we're just not buying from. Well,
that must be such a challenge when you're dealing with waterways. You know, on land, when something like that happens, you can corral cattle or you can corral fowl, but how do you do that in an ocean?
It's very difficult, you know. One example is kind of when you go back to things like potato wart, where you're able to kind of isolate a certain area and kind of put restrictions on it. When you have waterways and things move around, it's very challenging to do that. You can't really quarantine leases effectively. So, you know, it's one of those things that once it's in a bay, once it's in a river, it kind of anchors itself, and it kind of spreads nearby. It's very hard to get it out of there once it's in. So it's very challenging, you know. And in PEI right now, like, they consider pretty well the entire province to have it in different prevalences. Wow. There's some areas that are higher prevalence than others, but you know, the majority of PEI is pretty well determined to have it, unfortunately. So.
I'm going to ask you about this season in just a moment, but first I want to ask you about support. PEI has pledged $3 million to support oyster farmers throughout the province. Is this enough to help farmers like yourself recover?
It's challenging, you know. The province, you know, it's a good first step, what they've done, you know, and they've been generally supportive. You know, we've had quite a few conversations with the provincial fisheries, for example, but, you know, there's only so much the province themselves can do too, right? We need some federal support, I think, to really do the bulk of it. $3 million is not going to be enough. I mean, this industry provides tens of millions of dollars every single year to the local economy, especially in rural areas like where I'm from, Western PEI. You know, $3 million when you're like, we've lost $250,000 in inventory just last year, and that's just us, so, and we're probably maybe 10%, right? So, this is going to be a multi-year situation. It's going to take probably 7 to 8 years for this entire industry to recover. 3 million is probably not going to be enough. We might need some federal support through agencies like the Atlantic Canadian Opportunities Agency, COA, Atlantic Fisheries Fund, things like that. I think we're going to need some federal support in addition to what the province is doing.
Given the importance that this industry is to the province of PEI, tell me about your concerns, not just for this season, but you said this could be a multi-seasonal problem. What are your concerns as you're looking ahead?
Well, one of the main things I'm concerned about is, the sustainability and viability of the industry. I have 150 fishers under me, and a lot of them are wondering what's going to happen. Like, where's my livelihood going to be? Badek Bay, the main area that we buy from in the spring fishery, there's not a dory there for the first time in hundreds of years. There's no boats there. And all the other rivers, they can handle, to a point, a little bit of fishing, but it's going to come to a point where the fishers are going to be scounging and looking for areas to harvest oysters, and it's going to get wiped out in a large way. So it's going to be a challenge to build a livelihood and sustain a family, on the oyster fishery, and PEI is what could become reality. So that's one of those things that it's happened so suddenly and so aggressively that, we're not prepared to handle that, right? So we need government support. We can't do this all on our own. It's a nightmare. So the economic impacts of it's going to be huge, and it's going to really hurt small communities like ours. So.
Listen, Thomas, I know that you and the people who work with you are in the midst of it, so we appreciate you taking time to come on this morning, letting the rest of the country know what's going on. Thomas Burley, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks. Take care.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.